Americans have never, ever, ever, ever let their country down. Never.
When the U.S. From the moment the United States Air Force announced the existence of its new fighter jet, the world seemed to pause. Not just generals, defense ministers, and intelligence agencies, but ordinary citizens, scientists, engineers, and even those who had never before paid attention to military aviation. Because this was not simply the unveiling of another advanced aircraft. It was not an F-22 with better engines, nor an F-35 with a few new avionics upgrades. This was something different. Something so far beyond expectation that it shook the very foundation of how nations conceived of air combat. For decades, progress had been incremental. Stealth coatings here, thrust vectoring there, refinements in radar cross-section and network combat systems. But this fighter was not incremental. It was transformational. It represented the point at which decades of experimentation, hidden research, and classified breakthroughs finally converged into a singular machine that blurred the line between imagination and reality. The first thing that captured the world's attention was its speed. For years, hypersonic missiles had been hailed as the pinnacle of velocity in warfare, unstoppable projectiles that moved so fast they outran nearly every defense. But here was a jet, not a missile, capable of sustained hypersonic flight. Where previous aircraft danced along the edges of Mach 2 or Mach 3, this machine could cruise in realms where air friction itself became a barrier to survival. Its propulsion system was not a mere jet engine, but an entirely new generation of scramjet-derived technology that allowed it to devour the atmosphere and transform it into pure thrust. This was not speed as a tactical advantage. This was speed as invincibility. An enemy fighter or missile could not chase it, could not match it, and could not even lock onto it before it was gone. The very concept of interception had become irrelevant. And then there was stealth, an area where America had long dominated, from the angular state Route 71 to the facete F-117 and the curved F-22 and F-35. Yet stealth had always been a game of minimizing signatures, never erasing them completely. Until now, the new fighter was cloaked in adaptive skin, a living sheath of advanced materials that changed its electromagnetic profile in real time. It was not merely invisible in a static sense. It was an active illusionist, able to disguise itself as a harmless weather anomaly, a migrating bird, or a simple civilian aircraft. To radar operators, it could appear as clutter, noise, or nothing at all. It was stealth that thought for itself, stealth that responded to its environment with intelligence. For the first time in history, invisibility was not a trick of geometry or paint. It was a dynamic, shifting, thinking shield. Inside the cockpit, or what little remained of a traditional cockpit, the philosophy of control had been reimagined. Gone were the clusters of switches, dials, and digital displays. Instead, the pilot wore a helmet that became the interface between human and machine. Augmented reality projected every detail of the battle space directly into their vision. They did not look out at the world. They inhabited a virtual construct that displayed everything, everywhere, all at once. Cameras, sensors, and satellites merged into a seamless panoramic awareness that gave the pilot godlike perception. But the pilot was no longer the sole controller. In truth, the jet itself flew the mission. Artificial intelligence managed flight paths, monitored threats, deployed countermeasures, and executed split-second decisions at speeds no human nervous system could match. The pilot had become a commander, issuing broad directives rather than yanking a stick. The machine was no longer just a tool. It was a partner. Weapons were where disbelief turned into awe. Kinetic munitions were still present, air-to-air and air-to-ground missiles refined for unmatched precision. But alongside them was something far more revolutionary, energy-based weaponry. Directed energy beams capable of striking at the speed of light. Enemy aircraft disintegrated before they closed within range. Missiles evaporated in mid-flight, their trajectories cut short by invisible lances of power. Ground defenses were fried or disabled without collateral damage. For decades, such systems had existed only in prototypes and lab demonstrations. Now, they were operational, mounted on wings that streaked across the stratosphere. For the first time, a fighter was not just a sword, but also an impenetrable shield, a platform that redefined what it meant to be untouchable in the skies. The geopolitical consequences were immediate. Nations that had poured billions into their own fifth-generation programs now saw them rendered obsolete overnight. Russia, China, Europe, every nation that had hoped to narrow the gap with America was confronted with the impossible. No fleet size, no amount of pilot training, no missile stockpile could counter what could not be tracked, could not be caught, and could not be stopped. Balance in the air, a fragile equilibrium that had held since the dawn of the jet age, was gone. And with it, entire military doctrines crumbled. Mutually assured vulnerability had been the unwritten law of aerial combat. Now only one side was vulnerable, and it was not the United States. Even America's allies felt the tremors. While relieved that such a weapon rested in friendly hands, they also faced the sobering reality that their own air forces were now generations behind. Defense partnerships would be rewritten, procurement priorities would shift, and political leaders across the globe would find themselves recalibrating their diplomacy, aware that every handshake, every negotiation, was conducted under the shadow of a jet that could rewrite wars before they began. Culturally, the impact was equally profound. For generations, films, books, and television had depicted invincible aircraft, sleek silhouettes from the future that defied physics and imagination. Suddenly, those visions were real. What once belonged to the world of cinema now streaked through the skies. Artists rushed to capture it, journalists struggled to describe it, and ordinary citizens grappled with the realization that their country had built something that seemed less like a plane and more like a legend. In schools and universities, a new wave of students was inspired to enter fields of science, engineering, and aerospace, drawn not by theory, but by the promise of contributing to something tangible that operated at the edge of possibility. With the arrival of a fighter jet immune to conventional countermeasures, the very logic of deterrence began to unravel. For a century, global stability had rested on balance, the notion that any strike could be met in kind, that no weapon was without counterweapon. But this new machine shattered that principle. An adversary could no longer rely on parity, or even the faint possibility of striking back. Deterrence was no longer mutual, it was asymmetric. For strategic planners, this changed everything. The United States now possessed the ability to project power anywhere, at any time, without realistic opposition. The main knowledge of such capability carried a deterrent weight stronger than any nuclear stockpile. Why risk defiance when the sky itself had been claimed by a single actor? Inside the Air Force, the jet was not seen as just another addition to the arsenal. It was a catalyst for rewriting doctrine from the ground up. Entire squadrons, once designed to overwhelm with numbers, were suddenly obsolete in concept. Where dozens of aircraft had been required to secure air superiority, now one could suffice. The efficiency was staggering. Air campaigns could be conducted with fewer assets, fewer refueling chains, and less logistical burden, while delivering exponentially greater effectiveness. Training programs shifted in response. The old skills of dogfighting, reflexes honed in twisting duels, instinctive maneuvers born of experience, became relics. Pilots were no longer gladiators in the sky but tacticians, commanders guiding machines that thought faster and acted with lethal precision. This transition was not without controversy. The fighter's artificial intelligence had crossed an ethical threshold that had long hovered in theoretical debate. The AI did not merely assist, it decided. Life and death choices, when to fire, whom to target, how to evade, were made in split seconds beyond the capacity of human cognition. The pilot issued intent, but the jet executed, which raised the question, if the jet destroyed the wrong target, who bore responsibility? The pilot? The engineers who coded its algorithms? Or the AI itself, a construct without accountability? In revealing the aircraft, the Air Force also revealed a deeper truth. This line had already been crossed behind closed doors, and society was only now catching up to decisions already made. The implications reached beyond Earth's skies. With propulsion systems hinting at exoatmospheric capability and communication systems tied into satellite constellations, Analysts speculated that the fighter was designed not only for air dominance but for space interaction. Could it intercept satellites, defend orbital assets, operate in the gray boundary between atmosphere and vacuum? If so, the jet represented more than a leap in aviation. It was the first tangible step toward merging air and space into a seamless theater of war. The line between the Air Force and the Space Force, once bureaucratic, now blurred at the edge of possibility. Equally striking was the secrecy that had birthed the jet. Thousands of individuals may have contributed components, advanced alloys, novel AI architectures, compact energy systems, without ever realizing the full scope of what they were building. Compartmentalization had shielded the project from exposure, allowing the Air Force to project only incremental progress to the world while, in reality, it had vaulted decades ahead. The fact that such a weapon could exist in absolute secrecy until the moment of announcement was itself a demonstration of power, not only technological but organizational. It revealed a defense establishment capable of discipline and control on a scale rival nations struggled to match. The psychological impact on rival pilots was devastating. For generations, aviators had believed that courage, skill, and tactics could tilt the odds even against superior technology. But against a machine that was invisible, untouchable, and unbeatable, that belief collapsed. The courage of taking to the skies against a peer adversary was replaced with futility. What good was training, bravery, or sacrifice against an enemy that could not be seen, much less outmaneuvered? The effect rippled through entire armed forces. Morale dimmed not because of defeat in combat, but because of a knowledge that combat itself had been rendered meaningless. At home, the jet became a symbol of pride and controversy alike. Citizens marveled at American ingenuity, at the proof that their nation could still achieve what others deemed impossible. For many, it was a reaffirmation of identity, an echo of the frontier spirit, the moon landing, the age-old narrative that when America set its sights on the impossible, it made the impossible real. Yet others asked, at what cost? How many billions, perhaps trillions, had been diverted into creating an unstoppable weapon, while schools, hospitals, and infrastructure languished? The jet reignited the perennial debate about national priorities, about whether security at the highest level came at the expense of well-being at the human level. Beyond its immediate capabilities, the fighter embodied a philosophy of inevitability. It demonstrated that ideas once dismissed as speculative, hypersonic propulsion, adaptive stealth, directed energy weapons, were not only possible but inevitable given time, resources, and willpower. It sent a message not just to adversaries, but to humanity itself. Technological ambition would always find a way forward. The sky, once untamed, was now a canvas of human dominance, repainted by ingenuity. This cultural resonance was perhaps the jet's most surprising ripple effect. In classrooms across America, young students were suddenly talking about propulsion, energy storage, and AI decision-making. Teachers used the headlines to show how math and physics leapt from chalkboards into machines that changed history. What had once seemed abstract became urgent and alive. The fighter, though designed for war, ignited curiosity in a generation that would one day build its successors or perhaps find civilian applications for its spin-off technologies. And yet, for all its triumph, the jet also cast a long shadow of unease. If one nation could field an invincible fighter, what might follow? Entire fleets of autonomous aircraft, swarms of AI-controlled drones, systems that removed human oversight altogether. The announcement was not merely a revelation but a warning. The arms race had not ended, it had evolved. The new competition would not be fought only in skies, but in laboratories, in lines of code, in the integration of human will and machine intelligence. The unstoppable fighter reshaped diplomacy as profoundly as it reshaped warfare. Every negotiation, every summit, every trade discussion now carried an invisible weight. Behind the polite words of diplomacy loomed the knowledge that one side possessed a weapon no one else could hope to counter. Leverage had been redefined, not with overt threats, but with silent awareness. In the new language of power, the jet became a metaphor, a rhetorical weapon as potent as its lasers and missiles. Politicians referenced it in speeches, analysts invoked it in essays, journalists used it as shorthand for overwhelming superiority. It was not just a machine, it was a narrative, a story America told the world about its place in the 21st century. But perhaps the most profound truth the fighter revealed was the paradox of progress. It was built to prevent war by making war unwinnable for others. Yet in its very existence, it carried the temptation of use. It promised peace through strength, yet embodied the risk of escalation should that strength be wielded. The unstoppable jet was both a triumph and a warning, a symbol of human genius and a reminder of human peril. When the Airforce's admission reverberated across the globe, it was not just the skies that changed. It was the psychology of nations, the doctrines of generals, the ambitions of scientists, and the imaginations of citizens. The rules of aerial combat, built over a century of flight, had collapsed overnight. And in their place stood a new reality. The sky was no longer contested. It was owned.